curious, is this right here the new boogeyman, or is it the old boogeyman just simply repackaged? And what I mean by the new or old or repackaged boogeyman is the same thing that these people always resort to. White people
Voters
bad.
don't vote that way. They don't vote based on economics or based on the benefits they're getting economically from the president. They're increasingly, from the Tea Party on, they're voting on race. They're voting on this idea of an invasion of brown people over the border. The idea that they can't get whatever job they want. A black person got it, therefore drive all the blacks out of the colleges, get rid of DEI. That is what they're voting on. They're just voting specifically on racial animus. At this stage, it isn't about economics.
Tab in this poll. Among black voters, Joe Biden is winning just 66% versus 23% for Donald Trump. 66% is the number to note there. 23% is it. If any Republican wins 23% of the black vote in a presidential race, that Republican will be president of the United States. But 66% for Joe Biden is a full-scale disaster area. You win 2/3 of the black vote and you're a Democrat, you are toast in a presidential race. Now, again, these crosstabs.
Now, obviously, I decided to throw in that little bit from Shapiro, who was going over the polls that came out over last weekend from New York Times, Siena, YouGov, Wall Street Journal. Of course, this also included a Fox News poll. And of course, here I am doing this video on the day after Super Tuesday and releasing it once again the day afterwards. But the real reason why I'm doing it this way while Super Tuesday is not trending is because it's got to do with a bigger overall theme. Now, guys, I have done maybe 3 or 4 videos here recently talking about how it is that the Democratic Party and, of course, the mainstream media has actually either given their voters, their viewers, false hope on stuff like, say, Trump being removed from the ballot, not being able to run for president, or possibly going to prison, all that type of stuff there, and how it is that these viewers have been led astray. And I've also talked about not only that, but I've also talked about how it is that they've also, to a certain extent, blackpilled their voters, which is one of the main reasons why it is the third video that I did on this topic, which of course included mostly stuff from Jesse Waters, who was going over the fact that the mainstream media had in fact given their viewers and their voters false hope that once again, they are in fact blackpilling their voters. Now guys, I was going to make this one large overarching video for Thursday, but I decided to kind of pull back on that and just break it into 2 separate videos because I think there are points from both that kind of overlap, but still at the same time, it goes to the old saying that this right here is the playbook, white people bad. Of course, it's on the final page of the playbook because quite frankly, they don't really have anything else after that. But once again, here we are listening to the ramblings of MSNBC go on and on and on and drone on and on and on about how it is that immigration is such a very, very big issue. Let's roll this little montage from MSNBC. This is, of course, the Circle Back girl, Joy Reid, who, quite frankly, looks like Mark Davis. And also Rachel Madcow, the Jerry Seinfeld look-alike. Let's just roll this.
Voters don't vote that way. They don't vote based on economics or based on the benefits they're getting economically from the president. They're increasingly, from the Tea Party on, they're voting on race. They're voting on this idea of an invasion of brown people over the border. The idea that they can't get whatever job they want. A black person got it, therefore drive all the blacks out of the colleges, get rid of DEI. That is what they're voting on. They're just voting specifically on racial animus. At this stage, it isn't about economics.
Virginia. Immigration was the #1 issue. Again, these could change in Virginia.
Well, Virginia does have a border with West Virginia. Very, very contested.
Which is why Trump killed the immigration bill.
Correct.
That's why. And because otherwise he can't run against the other and brown people and people who don't look like him, like his supporters, his base of supporters, coming across the border and scaring people and killing people or whatever he's threatening out there. If you look at some of these exit polls,
he had one crisis. He's saying, all of these things were perfect. You had one crisis, bruh. It was called the pandemic. And you know what you did? You bollocksed it completely. You did so poorly at managing your sole crisis. The one hard thing you do, the reason he doesn't look old like Biden looks older, the presidency ages you when you do the job. Obama went gray because he was doing.
Gee, I wonder, I just wonder, are you sure it doesn't have to do with a 14-year-old girl in Virginia, Loudoun County to be exact, getting assaulted by an illegal? An illegal that, by the way, we're still waiting on information over. For all we know, he could have came from one of those cities like, say, Chicago or possibly New York. Maybe he was let go. And by the way, we're going to be talking about immigration again on Friday. I know that's been kind of the big moneymaker on the channel, but we'll be talking about it again on Friday. And of course, once again, we're kind of scaling back those takes so that way I can make a much larger take, much more nuanced take, like a video essay towards the end of the month of March. But the thing is this right here. Obviously, illegal immigration is a problem. We've been seeing this in New York, and we've been seeing this in Chicago. We've also been seeing this in Denver, Boston, all those types of cities there. One thing that I've not talked about, because I did not think about it so much at the time, but I did know it was a possibility, is that a lot of these migrants are, in fact, spilling over. A great example of this would be the Laken Riley situation, where we come to find out that the migrant who actually killed Laken Riley, we found out that this guy right here was actually arrested in New York. He was let go in New York City by District Attorney Alvin Bragg, the porous district attorney, that, of course, let this guy go due to a lack of space in one of the jails. Yes, New York City's crime problem is really and truly that bad. But let me take you guys back in time.
This portion of the news with a murder in Georgia that actually might have ties back to our area. Police there in the state have arrested a Venezuelan migrant for the murder of a University College student.
He was previously arrested here in New York, raising concerns about why he was set free. Robert Moses, are we really raising concerns about that? Isn't that the way it works here?
Well, Roseanne and Kurt, first of all, he was charged with non-bail eligible offenses, but even that's beside the point, because given that New York is a sanctuary city, the police department would not have told the feds about his arrest. So here we are. Laken Riley was a Dean's List student who went out for a run on Thursday and never came back. Her death is renewing calls to fix the crisis. Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirms to Fox News that the NYPD arrested 26-year-old Jose Antonio Ibarra in September and charged him with acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17 and a motor vehicle license violation. 1 year earlier, Ibarra, a Venezuelan national, had illegally entered the U.S. near El Paso. Last week, police arrested him for the murder of Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student at Augusta University. She was found dead near a lake.
So, yes, migration, illegal immigration, is definitely a problem this election cycle. Now, according to that polling data that Shapiro went over, which, by the way, I'm going to talk about a little bit more in this video, the thing is this right here. Illegals coming over, possibly committing crimes, and I know that not every one of them are committing crimes, but I've talked this on several occasions, that a border wall would cure a good portion of this. And of course, we're also finding out that the Biden administration is now flying a lot of them in. Of course, they love to blame Greg Abbott over this, even though Joe Biden could put a stop to this entire situation if he just simply said, okay, you know what, man, just build a border wall, go ahead and close down the border, put Remain Mexico back in place, let Border Patrol do their actual job. He could actually put an end to this. But of course, we're over here blaming the Orange Man because the Orange Man said this is not a good deal. By the way, that deal that they wanted to pitch, that was a deal that was going to allow 6,000 more migrants in a week. And it was a very, very weak Republican senator in James Lankford who proposed that deal. I don't see how Donald Trump is actually the one at fault. And then, of course, you got to hear the whole little shtick about COVID, even though obviously during COVID, what a lot of people fail to mention is that 60% of those deaths were attributed from 2021 to 2022 through that time frame, and possibly even 2023. Remember, there were other variants like Delta and Omicron. And of course, this was after the vaccine was created. So that right there is already a pretty bad narrative. And quite frankly, I don't think I have to go through the morass, which is blue state governors not opening up their states. Of course, they'll tell you it was all red state people who were dying. But of course, when you actually looked at the age of those who passed away, sadly, by the way, not trying to dance on anybody's grave or anything, I'm simply saying that the people who actually died were the elderly population, the ones that COVID was initially affecting. Just throwing it out there. And of course, the vast majority of those deaths occurred while Biden was in office. From, January 2021 all the way into the spring of 2023? Yeah. So, therefore, most of the deaths are actually more contributed to him, a lot like this illegal immigration situation, which now they want to pin on the orange guy, even though, obviously, the guy on watch is the one who's making the problem a lot worse. This reminds me of Afghanistan. This where it reminds me of the whole situation where it was that Bagram Air Force Base, and you had, you had Kabul, and they decided to shut down one air station. Oh, let's not forget that the withdrawal in Afghanistan was originally agreed upon conditions-based of May of 2021, but Biden pushed that back to September the 11th of 2021 because he wanted a photo op. He wanted to make it, be symbolic of the U.S. as a war on global terrorism, that sort of thing there. But of course, it obviously blew up in his face. And of course, people love to blame the orange guy for that. They don't really have anything left, and they don't seem to realize that they're the ones who are currently on watch. They have been on watch for over 8 months at that point in time when the disaster occurred. So once again, it's gaslighting, but it's gaslighting that, quite frankly, is not effective. Brings us to the topic of white rule rage. So MSNBC had these two guys who, it's pretty obvious, I would say that these guys remind me of they're not exactly people who I think have ever dealt with the grind. Now, I'm not saying that college professors are people who've never dealt with the grind, but if you've ever been to college or if you've ever been to a university, you would probably get the impression that a lot of your teachers have never actually dealt with the grind. So MSNBC brings these people on last week. I could have done a video on this last week when it was trending, but of course I wanted to wait and make it a bigger video because you guys know how I am. And of course, these guys get up there and they say crap like this.
Baltimore County, Tom Schaller, and journalist and opinion writer Paul Waldman. Their new book out tomorrow is entitled White Rural Rage, the Threat to American Democracy. And Tom, we'll start with you. Why are white rural voters a threat to democracy at this point? You would think, as we pointed out, looking at Joe Biden's background and Donald Trump's, that the opposite would be true.
I mean, we lay out the fourfold interconnected threat that white rural voters pose to the country. First of all, and we show 30 polls and national studies to demonstrate this, so we provide the receipts in Chapter 6. They're the most racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, anti-gay geodemographic group in the country. Second, they're the most conspiracist group. QAnon support and subscribers, election denialism, COVID denialism and scientific skepticism, Obama birtherism. Third, anti-democratic sentiments. They don't believe in an independent press, free speech. They're most likely to say the president should be able to act unilaterally without any checks from Congress or the courts or the bureaucracy. They're also the most strongly white nationalist and white Christian nationalists. And fourth, they are most likely to excuse or justify violence as an acceptable alternative to peaceful public discourse.
So you mentioned a lot of negative factors about this demographic.
Never mind the fact that about half of the black population in the country lives in small towns, mostly in the South below the Mason-Dixon line. Never mind the fact that if you actually go into the racial demographics of all states below the state of Delaware, you will find out that the black population is actually quite high in these areas. So therefore, it's more likely that white people went to school with people of color. So therefore, they also already work with one another. Whereas if you actually go up north and look at their rural population, which is kind of funny because it's typically the ones up north, the ones north of the Mason-Dixon line, who typically tend to vote Democrat, mostly in very, very large cities. The white rural populations up there don't really see that many black people or that many Hispanics. It makes me kind of question their logic on this one, because how can you hate or dislike what it is that you quite frankly can't see? And I'm not saying this to upset anybody from up north. I'm just simply giving you guys the overall demographics. That's all I'm doing. The thing is this right here, this whole white rural rage thing is just a last-ditch effort. But, of course, it does, in fact, get juicier over the course of this conversation because there's a massive contradiction at the very, very end, which we'll get to here in a second. But the thing that I wanted to say about this whole white rural rage thing is that it's just good old-fashioned reaching. Let's go ahead and attack the people that produce the food. Let's go ahead and attack the people who deliver the food. I don't think these people realize that the rural populace of the United States could turn the lights out of the very, very liberal places in the country. But we'll talk more about that in video number 2 for Thursday because obviously, once again, an overarching theme. Somebody in my comment section, a recent subscriber, did in fact comment on one of these videos, and he asked if they were trying to maybe create a slave class amongst whites. And my response to that is this right here. That probably would not work, especially given the fact that the whites are the primary landowners in the country itself. Also, a lot of blacks who work in very, very poor areas, the areas they quite frankly love to make fun of. Another shtick you're probably going to hear of these people is, well, the blue states pay more in taxes. Okay, but the red states also have the vast majority of the means of productions in the country, and also to go on top of this, we also have pretty much all the military bases too. So therefore, you're actually paying the red states for protection, and you're also paying the red states for your food. Nice try. But still, though, at the same time, the conversation, of course, thickens.
What else do they have in common?
Well, I think that what really matters at
what
this
makes
point
them
in time.
vulnerable?
Oh, well, a lot of that has to do with, as a starting point, the problems that rural America has, which are very real and very profound. They have more problematic education systems. They have poor infrastructure. They've had a lack of economic opportunity. We've seen a lot of manufacturing jobs leave from rural areas. And that kind of left them open to someone like Donald Trump, who would come along and tell them something that was true, that there is a system that has not served them well. And he said...
They're pissed off.
They are pissed off, and they have some reason to be, with both parties. The trouble is that what Donald Trump gave them was not something that was actually going to fix those problems, but was just a kind of a way to channel their rage and anger. And, we've been told for so long, especially Democrats have been told, that in order to get rural voters, to get them to listen to you, you have to go there, you have to really empathize with them, you have to show them that you understand their lives, you have to, put on a Carhartt jacket and go down to somebody's farm.
Have a beer.
And maybe milk a cow.
Yes.
And it turned out that none of that was true.
No.
When Donald Trump came along, he didn't do anything.
Molotov cocktail. And I love that little contradiction at the very end, which I'll get to here in a second. The truth be told is this right here. We sent Donald Trump to Washington, D.C. to take care of a problem for us. And while he may not have fully been able to get it taken care of, we understand the reason why. The swamp is very, very large. It's very, very deep. He was a bit of a human Molotov cocktail for us. But let me go ahead and say this. A lot of what Trump was telling us, a lot of things like bringing back jobs and stuff, that was people like Bill Clinton, George Herbert Walker Bush, who sent those jobs overseas, and not to mention George W. Bush and your Lord and Savior Barack Hussein Obama. We're going to be coming back to this here in a second because it kind of goes to the whole point of the liberal elites or the establishment elites never talking to people in rural areas, which are very, very important, as I'll explain in this video and the next video as well. But don't worry, we'll get back to this. I really love how at the very end he said that you have to go to these white rural areas. This was the common conception that you had to go to these white rural areas. You milk a cow, wear a Carhartt jacket, stuff like that there. But then he says right there at the very end that Donald Trump did not do any of that, but yet he got our votes. We'll be playing that again in the second video because to me it's absolutely hilarious the way he just completely contradicted himself with that last bit. The reason why so many white people, especially those who live in white rural areas, which by the way also have a lot of black people and a lot of Hispanics in those areas too, it's pretty daggone diverse. The biggest reason why it is that they voted for Donald Trump is because Donald Trump was the first person to actually, actually come talk to us in a very long time. Ronald Reagan did this too, okay? He did this for as well. You guys remember the old Reagan joke about how it was that they'd never seen a Republican before? Let me just kind of refresh your memory.
To be a Republican in this area of the country felt a little bit like being Gary Cooper in High Noon, outnumbered in a big way. But I remember the story of a fellow who was running for office as a Republican, and he was in a rural area and it wasn't known to be Republican, and he stopped by a farm to do some campaigning. And when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped and he said, "Wait right here till I go get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before." So he got her, and the candidate looked around for a podium from which to give his speech, and the only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. And at the end of it, the farmer said, "That's the first time I ever heard a Republican speech." And the candidate said, "That's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform."
White rules, we don't have time to deal with the issues of the world because we're producing the food and we're producing all the things that you people who live in these suburbs and cities. And by the way, I'm not saying it to be mean to those who live in suburbs. I'm talking about the liberal elites. I want to go get that across. We produce the things that the liberal elites, quite frankly, use. And they don't seem to realize exactly how quick these people who live in the rural areas could turn out their lights if they actually wanted to. We'll talk more about that in video number 2. But obviously, this type of messaging is not working. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the polls that came out this past weekend from the New York Times, Siena, of course from YouGov, and of course the Wall Street Journal and Fox News tend to indicate that this type of strategy is not working. let me roll the Shapiro, even though I'm not a Shapiro fan, but he did a pretty good job of explaining this polling data.
The problem for Joe Biden is that he governed as a radical Bernie Sanders type. He got into office and he decided he was going to govern far to the left. Instead of entering with the coalition that brought him and then dancing with them, he decided to jettison the entire center of the political spectrum. And Donald Trump is gradually taking over the center of the political spectrum, as we discussed last week on the show. In this poll, among black voters, Joe Biden is winning just 66% versus 23% for Donald Trump. 66% is the number to note there. 23% is if any Republican wins 23% of the black vote in a presidential race, that Republican will be president of the United States. But 66% for Joe Biden is a full-scale disaster area. You win 2/3 of the black vote and you're a Democrat, you are toast in a presidential race. Now, again, these crosstabs, you have to take them with a certain grain of salt. They have huge margins of error, up to 10 points margins of error for some of these crosstabs, because, again, when you do a poll, the accuracy of the poll...
There are some things that Ben did say in his hour-long ordeal talking about this poll and the episode right there that I did not fully agree with. I'll link it in the description box for you guys. But even after mentioning the margin of error, he does a pretty daggone good job of lamenting or mitigating exactly everything that would not have been mentioned. For example, the poll sample sizes are much, much larger. Typically, the larger polling sample sizes typically tend to be the most accurate, and YouGov, which is the primary poll that was cited, even though I know I said New York Times, but New York Times will use Siena, and they'll even bring up the YouGov poll from time to time. The bigger the sample size, typically the more accurate that it is. However, these polls have been pretty daggone consistent with the RCP aggregate. And when you hear something like, well, 10% of Biden's voters plan on voting for Trump now, that's a pretty big deal. It doesn't seem to me like it's all just white people voting for Donald Trump. There's also a lot of black people in there who are voting for Donald Trump. And yes, I understand that there is a margin of error, but when you've got 10% of the people who voted for Joe Biden now saying they're going to be voting for Donald Trump, it makes you wonder if it's all white people. I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm pretty sure it's a lot of Hispanics. Hispanics, by the way, that were here illegally who don't like it when other illegal Hispanics come across and actually wreck the process. Or the blacks who right now are seeing illegals coming in, taking over their areas of business, taking away certain benefits they feel that are for them. Like I said before, it should be called a hand up, not a hand out. That's basically what I'm saying. Of course, a lot of these blacks live in some very, very poor areas in cities like, say, Chicago and New York and Philadelphia. And they have to kind of take a hand up to go along with their part-time job because they're in very, very poor areas. Poor areas, by the way, that Democrats created because they're the mayors, the ones who control the city councils of these cities. Yeah, it's mostly projection. These people are just simply blaming you for what it is that they are guilty of. They always accuse you of that they are guilty of. Constant projection, that's who these people really and truly are. Once again, let's blame rural white people. Going back to that question about a slave class, they've kind of always treated white rules like this. Also, something else too, I didn't mention this before, or I've only mentioned it very, very much in passing. Yes, Donald Trump was kind of a human Molotov cocktail for us. But Trump was actually doing what it is that we want him to do, at least when it comes to the jobs front. We had the best economy we had in years. Even Jim Cramer of CNBC says the greatest numbers of our lives back in 2019. That was right before the pandemic. Also, something else too, and this right here is to the crowd that's very, very overtly anti-Trump from the Republican side who loves to use this as a talking point. When Trump was in office during the pandemic, he tried to get it opened up on several occasions. He wanted the country opened up by Easter. It didn't happen. Georgia came out, they opened up on their own. A couple more states came out, opened on their own. And finally, Trump said, okay, let's go ahead and open on up. But of course, blue state governors, they didn't want to open up either. You think maybe it had to do with politics? Like I said before, this right here, once again, is just another example of these people accusing you of that they are already guilty of. And obviously, the American people are not falling for it anymore, and they're basically giving a good old-fashioned FU to the system. This whole topic of white rural rage, like I said, I'll go more in depth in it in video number 2 because you got to ask yourself a question. Is there a great awakening going on, or are we really and truly in the middle of a civil war? Or are we about to go into a civil war? Well, like I said, we'll talk about that in the next video of the day. But still, though, people aren't falling for this racist crap that the mainstream media constantly puts out there. Okay, their goal was to originally black pill conservative voters. But as I said in the video that I released that was mostly talking about what Jesse Waters was saying, I told you guys in that video, conservative voters are almost impossible to black pill. We just don't have time for it. It's kind of like that phrase in the movie Predator where Jesse the Body Ventura said, "I ain't got time to bleed." That's basically what it is. We don't have time for this nonsense out of the media, so we just continue to move on with our day. We actually deal with the literal grind that liberals don't deal with. But we'll talk more about that in the next video. Please tell me what you guys think in the comment section. Please hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, sound off in the comment section. I would love to hear what you guys have got to say, and I'll see you guys later.